One wrong message, a simple mistake, sets off a chain of events that changes everything. Emily, a single mother in desperate need, accidentally contacts her billionaire ex-husband. What happens next is a heartfelt story of past regrets, unexpected generosity, and the possibility of starting over. Before we dive into this deeply moving tale, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories that truly inspire. Emily sat at the edge of her worn-out sofa, a faint hum from the refrigerator filling the otherwise silent room. The apartment, cluttered with the remnants of another day lived in struggle, bore witness to the daily battle she fought just to keep things together. On the coffee table before her, an empty can of baby formula sat as a stark reminder of her limited means. The money was running low again, and it had been weeks since she last had a proper rest. Her daughter, Lily, was asleep in the next room, her tiny face peaceful, unaware of the silent panic her mother was feeling. With trembling hands, Emily unlocked her phone and opened a message thread with CLA, her closest friend. She hesitated for a moment, fingers hovering above the keyboard. She hated to ask again, but she had no choice. She typed, "Hey, can you lend me some money to buy formula for Lily just until payday? I'm so sorry to ask again." Emily hit send, heart sinking with the weight of her repeated need. This wasn't the first time she had reached out for help, and it wouldn't be the last. Her pride was torn apart by every request, but her daughter needed to eat. However, as she glanced at her phone, Emily's stomach twisted in horror. The message hadn't gone to CLA. It had gone to someone else. Nick, her ex-husband. The Nick who was now a billionaire tech CEO, gracing the covers of Forbes while she barely made ends meet in her rundown apartment. The same Nick who had walked out on her and their family years ago when their marriage had crumbled, leaving behind shattered dreams and broken promises. Her heart raced, and she froze. Her fingers hovered over the screen, ready to unsend the message. But before she could act, her phone vibrated. The screen lit up with his response. "Wait, I'm coming over now." Panic surged through her chest. No, this couldn't be happening. She typed frantically, "Sorry, wrong person. Ignore this." But it was too late. Her phone vibrated again, and this time it was a notification from her bank. With trembling hands, she opened the app, her breath catching in her throat. A deposit of $1 million. Her first thought was disbelief. This had to be a mistake, but the transfer details confirmed it. The sender, Nick's corporate account. Emily's mind raced as the weight of the sum hit her, $1 million. For formula. She felt dizzy, as if the very walls of her tiny apartment were closing in on her. Another knock at the door brought her crashing back to reality. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the door, wondering if he could have gotten here that fast. Another knock, louder this time. Emily swallowed hard and opened the door, only to find herself face to face with Nick. He stood in the doorway, impeccable in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. His sharp blue eyes softened when they met hers, but the power he exuded filled the small space with an unnerving calm. "Emily," he said, his voice low and steady, causing her knees to weaken. "We need to talk." Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stood there, unable to form a coherent thought. Nick, the man who had once been her husband, the man who had left her, the man who had walked away from their family when things had fallen apart. He now stood in her doorway, holding all the power in the world. She opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. Emotions surged through her. Panic, embarrassment, anger, and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Nick stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the cramped apartment. The small space suddenly felt even smaller, and Emily wished for nothing more than to disappear. "What are you doing here?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "You needed help," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "And I'm here." Emily shook her head in disbelief. "Nick, this was a mistake. I didn't mean to send you that message." Her voice faltered as she gestured wildly. "I didn't ask you for." She couldn't bring herself to say the words. $1 million. Nick, his expression softening but unwavering, finished her sentence for her. "I know, but I sent it anyway." "Why?" Emily demanded, her voice sharp now. "You don't owe me anything." He met her gaze with an intensity that made her stomach turn. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of regret in his eyes, or perhaps guilt, but it disappeared just as quickly. Because I can, he said, his tone nonchalant, as if his actions were completely justified. Emily's fists clenched at her sides. I don't need your charity, she spat, her voice rising with anger. But Nick interrupted her, his tone firm but not unkind. You have a daughter to take care of, our daughter, he said, his words like a thunderclap, making Emily freeze. She had not expected him to bring that up. He had always been distant, detached, and now, here he was, claiming a stake in a life he had walked away from. Lily was her responsibility, Emily replied, her voice trembling, her emotions crashing over her like a wave. But Nick's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. She's mine too, he said, his voice low, and I'm not walking away this time. Emily's breath caught. What did he mean by that? Before she could ask, her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen, her blood running cold. It wasn't just the $1 million deposit. It was a series of transfers, one after the other, adding up to a total of $5 million. Each transaction came from Nick's account. Nick, she whispered, her voice trembling. What are you doing? He looked at her with unflinching eyes. I'm fixing things, he said, his tone resolute. Starting now. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that his sudden generosity wasn't just about helping her or Lily. There was something else, something deeper that he wasn't telling her. She didn't know if she wanted to find out. The weight of the situation pressed down on her as she stared at the string of numbers in her banking app. $5 million. This wasn't just about buying formula anymore. This was something far bigger, and Emily felt the walls closing in on her. Nick was watching her closely, but she couldn't meet his gaze. She was too overwhelmed, too trapped. You don't have to look at me like I've just handed you a bomb, Nick said after a long silence. His voice broke through her thoughts. She snapped her head up. That's exactly what this is, Nick, she retorted. A bomb. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Nick's gaze remained unwavering as he stood in her living room, the weight of his actions hanging between them. Emily could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The $1 million deposit, the $5 million, none of it made sense. Why was he doing this? Why now, after all these years of silence? You don't understand, Emily said, her voice cracking slightly as she tried to regain control of the situation. This isn't about charity. It's about control. I don't want anything from you, Nick. His lips quirked, but there was no humor in it. Control? He asked, his voice low but steady. You think I'm trying to control you? He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Emily instinctively took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. Her apartment felt a cage. I've spent years building this company, he continued, his tone hardening. I built it for moments like this, so I can make a difference. So I can help the people who matter to me. And you and Lily are my responsibility, Emily. Whether you like it or not. His words hung in the air like a declaration, but Emily couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more behind them. Nick's motivations were never simple. She knew that from the years they had spent together, both as a married couple and as partners in their shared life, before it all unraveled. You don't get to decide what's best for me or for Lily, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. You left us, Nick. You can't just come back and fix everything with money. You don't even know what we need. Nick's expression softened for just a moment, but his eyes were sharp. You're right. I don't know everything, but I do know that you've been struggling for a long time, and I can help. Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. He had always been able to make her feel like the problem was her, as though she was the one holding them back, even when it was him who had walked away. His wealth and success were always a constant reminder of how far apart their lives had become. But now there was something different in his eyes, an intensity that she hadn't seen before. A glimmer of sincerity, perhaps? She didn't know, and she didn't want to know. She wasn't ready to face the possibility that he might actually want to change. Why don't you just leave? She asked, her voice almost a whisper, the question laced with both anger and fear. You've already done enough. I don't need your money. I don't need you. Nick didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stared at her for a long moment, his gaze almost piercing. Finally, he spoke again, but his voice was different now. Softer, as though he were revealing something he had kept hidden for a long time. I'm not leaving, Emily, he said quietly. Not this time. I made a mistake, and I want to fix it. but I can't do it alone. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had heard him say things like this before, in moments of desperation, but they had always been empty promises. And now, after years of separation, of pain and bitterness, he expected her to believe that he was finally ready to change? Emily shook her head, trying to push him away, but the words wouldn't stop coming. "You think throwing money at me will fix things?" she said, her voice rising again. "You can't buy your way back into my life, Nick. You can't buy your way back into Lily's life." Nick didn't react to her outburst. Instead, he simply looked at her with an intensity that unnerved her. "I know I can't buy your love, Emily," he said quietly, "but I can try to make things right. I know I've failed you before, but I'm not giving up this time." Emily felt her knees weaken, her resolve faltering. For the first time in years, she felt a crack in the wall she had built around herself. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was fine on her own, that she didn't need Nick. But now, with him standing there, offering help, not just with money, but with something deeper, something unspoken, she didn't know how to respond. But she couldn't let herself be swayed. Not again. "You don't get it," she said, her voice more subdued now, tinged with exhaustion. "I've had to do everything on my own. I've raised Lily without you, and I've fought every day to make sure she has a future. I don't need you coming back and complicating things. I don't need you to fix things that you can't." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Emily thought Nick would leave. But instead, he took another step forward. This time, it wasn't a step of dominance or control. It was a step of understanding. "I'm not here to complicate things," he said softly. "I'm here because I want to help, but I can't do it if you don't let me in." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Emily felt the weight of Nick's presence more acutely now, as if the room itself was closing in around her. She had built walls around her heart, brick by brick, over the years. It had been the only way she could survive the betrayal, the loneliness, the constant struggle. Now Nick stood before her, offering something she hadn't expected, help, but also something deeper, a chance at redemption. It felt almost too good to be true, too much like a dream she had long since given up on. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Nick," she said, her voice breaking as the vulnerability she had buried for so long began to surface. "You left me. You left us. And now you think you can just waltz in and fix everything with your money?" Nick's face hardened, but there was no anger in his eyes. Only determination, mixed with something softer. Something Emily hadn't seen in him in years. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," he said, his voice low and steady. "But I'm not the man I was when I left. I've changed. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I am asking for a chance to make things right for Lily, for both of us." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the emotions swirling inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he could truly change. But the years of hurt, the years of doing everything on her own, made it hard to open up again. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Nick didn't speak at first. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, which he handed to her without a word. Emily stared at it, confused. She unfolded the paper and looked down at the letter written in neat, precise handwriting. It was an agreement, a legal document. And at the top it read, "A formal offer for you and Lily's future, no strings attached." Her heart stopped. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nick's eyes met hers. "It's everything I can give you. It's everything I can do to help. It's not just money, Emily. It's a future for you and Lily, but only if you'll let me be part of it." Emily stared at the document in her hands, the words blurring as her mind raced. She had always prided herself on being independent, on standing strong despite the odds. But here Nick was, offering her the very thing she had sworn she would never accept. His money, his resources, his help. Everything she had fought against, wrapped in a shiny legal package. Her fingers trembled as she held the paper, the weight of it heavier than any decision she had ever faced. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust. It was about the future of her and Lily. Could she really take this step? Could she let Nick back into their lives, even for the sake of offering Lily a better future? "You're asking me to believe in you again?" Emily said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and uncertainty. "You want me to let you back in? Just like that? After everything? After you left us? After you walked away without a second thought? Nick's expression softened, but there was no hint of defensiveness in his eyes. He didn't try to justify his actions anymore. He simply stood there, waiting for her to process it. I can't change the past, Emily. I know I've hurt you, and I know I can't undo what I did. But I can do this. I can give you and Lily everything I've never been able to give before. A future, stability, a chance at something better. Her heart ached at his words. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the realization that this offer, this attempt at reconciliation, might actually be real. For so long, she had convinced herself that she didn't need him, that she was strong enough to make it on her own. But now, with this document in her hands, the truth was undeniable. She had always carried a fear that she might not be enough for Lily, that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she sacrificed, she would fall short. Lily deserved more than what Emily could give her on her own. But did she deserve the price of letting Nick back into their lives? I need time to think about this, Emily said, finally lifting her gaze to meet his. I can't make this decision now. I can't. Nick nodded, his face reflecting a quiet understanding. I get it. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here. I won't force you, but I'm not going anywhere. The words hung in the air, their weight suffocating. Emily wanted to push him away, to send him out of her life for good. But there was a part of her, deep inside, that wasn't sure if she could. Nick was right about one thing. Lily deserved a chance. Maybe this was it. Maybe this offer was a lifeline they couldn't afford to ignore. As Nick left the apartment, Emily stood frozen in place, the document still clutched tightly in her hands. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, none of them clear enough to make a decision. She had spent so many years convincing herself she didn't need him, that she could build a future without him. And now here he was, offering to help, offering a future that wasn't just hers, but Lily's too. But could she trust him? Could she risk opening that door again? The next few days were a blur. Emily tried to focus on her work, tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut that wouldn't go away. Every time she tried to sleep, the image of that legal document flashed before her eyes. The future it promised, the uncertainty of what accepting it would mean. Lily, as always, was the distraction she needed. The one thing Emily knew for sure was that her daughter was her world. Everything she did, every decision she made, was for Lily's sake. And so Emily found herself standing at a crossroads. One path led to her pride, her independence, and the life she had built for herself and Lily. The other led to Nick, a chance to offer her daughter everything she could never provide on her own. The decision weighed heavily on her. Could she trust Nick again, even for the sake of Lily? And what about herself? Could she live with the thought that in choosing to accept his offer, she was somehow admitting defeat? Or was it just a practical decision, the best one for Lily's future? That night, after putting Lily to bed, Emily sat in her quiet apartment, the document laid out on the table before her. She stared at the words, the offer that Nick had extended. It wasn't just a business agreement. It was an invitation to open a door she had shut so tightly years ago. It was a chance at healing. Healing for herself, for Nick, and for Lily. But it was also a risk. One that could change everything. She thought about the life they had built without Nick, the struggles they had faced, the victories they had celebrated. It hadn't been easy, but they had done it. And yet, despite all her efforts, there was still so much she couldn't give Lily. Could she really turn down an opportunity to give her daughter the future she deserved? Emily's hand hovered over the document, the pen just inches away from signing. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that this wasn't about her pride, about her independence. This was about Lily. This was about making sure Lily didn't have to struggle the way Emily had. Taking a deep breath, Emily made her decision. She picked up the pen, signed the document, and sealed it with a finality that felt both terrifying and relieving. As she put the pen down and looked at the signed agreement, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't the end of her story with Nick. It wasn't even the end of their healing, but it was a beginning, a chance, for both of them. Tomorrow she would take the next step, and somehow she knew it was the right one. The next morning, Emily felt a quiet sense of resolve as she folded the signed document and placed it in the envelope Nick had left behind. She was ready to move forward, ready to see where this new path would lead. But as she glanced at Lily, who was eating breakfast at the table, the reality of her decision hit her all at once. Lily didn't know about the offer yet. Lily didn't know about the past, about the hurt and the betrayal that had shaped Emily's every decision up until now. Lily only knew that her mother had done everything she could to provide for her, to create a life filled with love and security. But this offer, this deal with Nick, wasn't just about providing for her daughter. It was about confronting everything that had gone wrong in her own life and everything that could go right if she accepted the help. It was a storm of emotions, a tidal wave of guilt, hope, fear, and anticipation all crashing down at once. Emily had been carrying the weight of the past for so long that it had almost become part of her. And now she was about to invite that past back into her life. Could she really do it? Could she bring Nick into Lily's life after all this time? After all the hurt? Mom, what's that? Lily's voice broke through her thoughts, and Emily turned to see her daughter looking curiously at the envelope. Emily hesitated for a moment, the words caught in her throat. She hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't figured out how to explain it. How could she tell Lily that Nick, someone who had been absent from their lives for so long, was about to return? How could she explain that, for the first time, they were about to accept his help when he had been the one who walked away in the first place? "It's from Nick," Emily said finally, her voice tight. He made an offer to help us, to help with the things we've been struggling with." Lily tilted her head, processing the information. "But we've been fine, haven't we? You've always made sure I'm okay, Mom." Emily's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's confidence, but the weight of it all hit her again. No, they hadn't always been okay. They'd gotten by, but there was so much more they could have had, if only circumstances had been different. If only she hadn't had to carry the burden alone. "Yeah, we have been. But sometimes, even when we're doing our best, we need help," Emily said softly. "And Nick, well, he's offering it. For us." Lily didn't ask any more questions, but Emily could see the confusion in her eyes. This was a lot for a young girl to process. She had no memory of Nick in their lives. Not really. She didn't know the pain and the anger Emily had carried all these years. She only knew what Emily had shown her, a life built on love, care, and hard work. But now, the truth was coming to light. Nick's return meant more than just an offer. It meant a shift, a disruption in the world Emily had carefully constructed. And the more she thought about it, the more Emily realized that the future wasn't just about accepting Nick's help. It was about rebuilding trust, about finding a way to heal the fractures in their past. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily found herself alone with her thoughts once more. She sat at the kitchen table, the envelope still in front of her, as if waiting for her to take the next step. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the right choice, if this was really the best way to move forward. But deep down, she knew. She knew that taking this step, however painful and uncertain, was the only way to move past the hurt. It was a leap of faith, one that she had to take, not just for herself, but for Lily. She couldn't keep living in the past. It was time to embrace the future, whatever that might look like. The day came when Emily had to face Nick again. She had sent him a message earlier in the morning, telling him she had made her decision. She had signed the document. She had chosen to accept his offer. Nick's response had been simple: "I'll be there at noon." As the clock ticked toward the appointed time, Emily found herself pacing around the apartment, trying to gather her thoughts. The weight of the decision, though made, still pressed heavily on her. She had agreed to this. She had agreed to let him back in. But what now? What would this meeting bring? What would this new chapter in their lives look like? When the doorbell rang, Emily's heart skipped a beat. She opened the door to find Nick standing there, a soft smile on his face. He looked the same, still the same man who had walked out on them all those years ago. But there was something different in his eyes now, something that suggested he was no longer the man he had been. "Hi," he said, his voice tentative. "Hi," Emily replied, her voice steady but distant. "Come in." Nick stepped inside, his eyes scanning the apartment, as if taking in the small changes that had occurred over the years. The place was cozy, filled with warmth and life, but there was an underlying tension in the air now. It was the weight of what was about to happen, the shift in their relationship that couldn't be undone. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Nick said, his voice low. "I know it's a lot, and I know it's not easy, but I want to make this right. I want to make up for everything." Emily nodded, but her eyes remained guarded. "I'm still processing all of this, Nick. It's a lot, and I need to know that this time, you're not just offering help because you think it's the right thing to do. I need to know that you're actually here for us, for Lily, for me." Nick's expression softened, and he nodded. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere this time. You have my word." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest. She had made her decision, but the road ahead was still uncertain. There was no going back now. The days that followed the meeting with Nick felt like an odd mixture of tension and tentative hope. Emily was still processing everything, but there was a quiet shift in the air, a sense of something beginning to change. The reality of Nick's return had been a jolt to her system, but it wasn't as painful as she had expected. There was something about him now that felt different, more genuine, more earnest. He had called the next day, offering to meet again, this time at her favorite cafe. She had hesitated before accepting, unsure of what more they had to say to each other. But Nick's voice, soft and apologetic, had convinced her it was worth exploring. She couldn't deny that there was a part of her that wanted to believe he was sincere, wanted to believe that this time, things would be different. When they met, it was clear that Nick had been thinking deeply about their past. His usual confidence was tempered with a vulnerability that Emily hadn't seen in him before. He didn't offer grand gestures or promises this time. Instead, he simply spoke from the heart. "I know I can't undo what I've done," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that surprised her. "I can't take back the years I've been absent. I can't erase the hurt. But I want to show you that I'm here now. I want to prove to you that I can be the man you and Lily need. That I can be the father I should have been." Emily sat silently, taking in his words. It was a lot to process, and part of her wanted to refuse. Part of her wanted to tell him it was too late, that they had moved on, that they didn't need him. But another part of her, the part she had buried for so long, wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this time things could be different. "Why now?" Emily asked, her voice steady but tinged with doubt. "Why after all this time? Why are you suddenly so willing to come back into our lives?" Nick hesitated, then spoke slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "I've spent a long time regretting my decisions, and when I found out about Lily, about how much she's grown, how beautiful she is, I realized I was a fool for walking away. I want to be part of her life. I want to be part of yours, if you'll let me." The sincerity in his voice hit Emily like a wave. It was raw and real, and for the first time in years, she saw the man she had once loved, not the one who had abandoned them, but the one who was standing before her now, willing to make amends. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for this," Emily said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I'm not sure if I can trust you again." "I understand," Nick replied, his voice gentle. "I know it's going to take time. And I'm not asking for everything all at once. I just want the chance to show you that I'm serious, that I'm not here to make the same mistakes again." There was a long silence between them, filled with the weight of what was being said, and Emily couldn't help but feel the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble, bit by bit. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Nick could be the man he claimed to be now. Maybe this was the start of something new. It had been a few weeks since Emily had last seen Nick, and while the tension between them had lessened, the uncertainty remained. She had agreed to let him into their lives, slowly, carefully. Nick had taken the time to show up, to help when he could, but more importantly, to simply be present. No grand gestures, no promises, just a steady, quiet presence. The most surprising part, however, was how quickly Lily warmed to him. Emily had expected Lily to be distant, unsure of this man who was suddenly appearing in her life. But she was wrong. Nick had approached her with the same gentle sincerity he had shown Emily. He didn't try to force his way in. Instead, he let Lily come to him in her own time. One afternoon, Emily found them sitting together in the park, Lily showing Nick how to throw a frisbee. It was an innocent moment, nothing grand or earth-shattering, but to Emily, it felt like the beginning of something significant. She watched them interact, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. "You know," Emily said, sitting down beside them, "I never thought I'd see the day when the two of you would get along so well." Nick glanced at her, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I'm just trying to do my part." Lily giggled, tossing the frisbee to Nick. "He's pretty good at it, though." Emily couldn't help but laugh. There was something about the way Nick was interacting with Lily that felt so natural, so right. It wasn't forced. It wasn't something that could be manufactured. It was real. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like they were on the brink of something new. "I know this is a lot for you, Emily," Nick said, his voice quieter now, as if he didn't want to disturb the moment. "But I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I want to be here. For both of you." Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was truth. There was a part of her that still felt scared, still unsure of whether she could fully trust him again. But there was also a part of her that believed in second chances, that believed in the possibility of healing. "Let's take it one step at a time," she said, her voice steady but warm. "We'll see how things go. But right now, I'm willing to give this a chance." Nick's face softened with relief, and he nodded. "That's all I ask, one step at a time." And so they began to walk forward together, cautiously, but with a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. Emily knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it all, because now they had each other. And with that, anything was possible. As the weeks turned into months, Emily, Nick, and Lily began to settle into a new rhythm. Their interactions became more natural, less tentative. Emily noticed the changes in Nick, how he was more involved, more present, and how his relationship with Lily seemed to be blossoming in a way she hadn't expected. He was patient with her, offering guidance but never pushing, allowing Lily the space to decide for herself what kind of relationship she wanted with him. But the real test came one evening when Nick had promised to take Lily to a soccer game. Emily had been hesitant at first, uncertain about how she would feel seeing them out together, but she had agreed, trusting that Nick's commitment to showing up for them was genuine. However, the day of the game, Nick received an urgent call from work. It was a situation that required his immediate attention, one he couldn't ignore. As he stood in the doorway of their home, his face strained with the weight of the decision, Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Emily, I have to go," he said, his voice apologetic but firm. "I know I promised Lily, but I can't get out of this." She could see the conflict in his eyes, the guilt that was weighing on him, but Emily felt a twinge of disappointment. She knew that work had always been a big part of his life, but after everything they had been through, she had hoped for something more. "Go," Emily said quietly, though she wasn't sure whether she was doing it for him or for herself. "But you need to make this right. This isn't just about you anymore." Nick hesitated, then nodded. "I will. I promise." That evening, Emily sat with Lily, who was visibly upset. "I really wanted him to be here, Mom," Lily murmured, her eyes downcast. Emily felt the weight of her daughter's disappointment and couldn't help but share it. She had hoped for more too. But as the days passed, Nick made sure to make amends. He showed up with flowers, took them both out for ice cream, and spent time talking to Lily, explaining why he couldn't be there for the game. He didn't make excuses. He just acknowledged that he had failed to keep his promise, and he made it clear that it was something he regretted. "I can't be perfect, but I'm trying," he told Emily one evening, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "And I'll keep trying for both of you." Emily looked at him, the weight of the moment heavy in the air between them. She didn't know if this was the turning point they needed, or if it was just another disappointment that would push them further apart. But as she looked at Nick, she saw the sincerity in his eyes, and something inside her softened. "I know you are," she replied, her voice quiet. "But we can't keep doing this. We can't keep letting these promises go unfulfilled. It has to be different. Nick nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. I know, and I'll make it right. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like they were standing on solid ground. There was still uncertainty, still fear, but there was also a sense of determination. They weren't there yet, but they were getting closer. She knew that rebuilding trust took time, and though the path would be difficult, she felt ready to walk it, as long as Nick was by her side, proving that his actions spoke louder than his words. A year had passed since that pivotal moment, and Emily couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. Nick had shown up in ways that she hadn't thought possible. He had stepped up as a father, not just to Lily, but to her as well, working through their challenges with patience and understanding. Emily had learned to trust him again, though it hadn't been easy. There were moments when old fears and doubts would creep in, but she was no longer afraid to confront them. Lily, too, had grown close to Nick. Their bond had deepened over time, and Emily saw the joy in her daughter's eyes when she talked about him. He had earned her trust, and that was something Emily hadn't expected to see so quickly. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Nick turned to Emily, his eyes full of hope. I was thinking, maybe it's time we all take the next step. Maybe it's time for us to move in together. Emily froze for a moment, the weight of the question hanging in the air. She had been so focused on healing their relationship, on rebuilding trust, that she hadn't even considered what the future might look like in a more permanent way. But as she looked at Nick, she realized she was ready. She took a deep breath, glancing over at Lily, who was smiling up at them with an excited twinkle in her eyes. What do you think, sweetheart? Emily asked, her voice soft but filled with hope. Lily didn't hesitate. I think it sounds perfect. And in that moment, Emily realized that they had made it through the storm. They had worked through the hurt, the disappointments, and the doubts, and now they were ready to move forward together. There was no guarantee of perfection, but there was something stronger than that. There was love, and a willingness to fight for what mattered most. Nick smiled, reaching for her hand. Then let's make it happen, together. And as they stood there, hands intertwined, Emily knew that whatever the future held, they were ready for it. It wouldn't always be easy, but as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. Because this was just the beginning of their new chapter, and together, they would write it. As the years went by, Emily, Nick, and Lily built a life together, brick by brick, mending old wounds and creating new memories. The journey hadn't been perfect, but it had been theirs, filled with growth, understanding, and love. They had learned that healing wasn't a destination but a process, and they embraced it, step by step. Nick had become more than just a partner to Emily and a father to Lily. He had become someone who truly understood the weight of his promises and the importance of actions over words. Emily, too, had discovered a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed, the strength to forgive, to trust, and to open her heart again. Lily, once uncertain and hesitant, had blossomed into a young girl who knew the value of patience, compassion, and the beauty of second chances. She had found in Nick not just a father figure, but a role model, a man who showed her that love could endure even the toughest trials. Together, they had built something beautiful out of the fragments of their pasts. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. As long as they had each other, they could face anything that came their way. The story of Emily, Nick, and Lily was one of resilience, redemption, and the power of love. A reminder that even in the face of disappointment, there's always room for a new beginning. Thank you so much for sticking with us through this journey and for taking the time to listen to the full story. We hope you found it as engaging and meaningful as we intended it to be. Your support means the world, and we are incredibly grateful for every moment you've shared with us. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and make sure to subscribe so you never miss out on our future content. Your feedback and support help us create even better stories, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Once again, thank you for watching, and we can't wait to share more amazing content with you soon. See you in the next video.